I'm a citizen of the Mandan, Hidatsa, and Arikara tribes in western North Dakota, Fort Berthold Indian Reservation. I work with tribes to inform them of the capabilities of geothermal, the benefits of geothermal, discuss misinformation, because there's a tremendous amount of misinformation out there. It's extremely important for everyone to prioritize building relationships with tribes, even if you're just developing a project. Lands were allotted to tribal members at the time, and the remaining land on the reservation was sold to non-natives. That created, in some locations, a checkerboard. So you have states like the state of Colorado that considers the geothermal resource as a surface right, and the BIA classifies geothermal resource as a mineral right. So you have these locations where it's a chunk of tribal land and then a chunk of non-tribal land. So then it's like mineral ownership, surface ownership, mineral ownership, surface ownership, and that complicates leasing.
Welcome to Geothermal Unleashed, where we will explore the cutting edge of geothermal energy. I'm Elizabeth Cambre from the Valorec New Energies team. I am here to help educate and document geothermal's rise in the global energy transition. Today, I'm delighted to welcome Jessica Eagle-Bluestone, who is the Tribal Engagement and Policy Associate with Geothermal Rising. Jessica, welcome to the show. To get things kicked off, why don't we start, Jessica, by you sharing a little bit about your educational background and career journey and what inspired you to get involved in the geothermal industry?
Thank you for having me on, Elizabeth. So my educational background is I have my undergrad in geology from North Dakota State University. And I worked in oil and gas for a few years with my tribe's operating company, Missouri River Resources. So I'm a citizen of the Mandan, Hidatsa, and Arikara tribes in western North Dakota, Fort Berthold Indian Reservation. So we overlie the Williston Basin. So there's a lot of oil and gas development there. I decided to pursue a master's degree, and I started out in petroleum engineering. It was interesting, however, that was back in 2020 when there was the huge oil and gas downturn due to COVID. And I did plan on getting into geothermal at some point, but it kind of sped up my plans, and I went to a Members in Transition webinar that RMAG was putting on, and they had Jamie Beard as a guest, and she was talking about geothermal and how easy the transition is for a lot of people in the oil and gas industry to apply their skills to the geothermal industry. So that's when I decided to double down on geothermal that I was already somewhat like dabbling in and kind of go full force with my master's and gearing it towards a career in geothermal energy.
What does a typical day look like for you? I'm especially interested to understand what a tribal community manager does and what are some of the challenges that you face every day.
As a tribal community engagement manager, right now my time is heavily focused on the Indigenous Geothermal Symposium, which will be October 24th and 26th, just before GRC in Reno, Nevada. And that is going to be that's an international event that's centered around Indigenous peoples. We have people from Taiwan, New Zealand, Canada, and then across the US. So a lot of my time lately has been going towards the symposium, but on more of a day-to-day basis throughout the year, I work with tribes to inform them of the capabilities of geothermal, the benefits of geothermal, discuss misinformation, because there's a tremendous amount of misinformation out there, and really just helping them understand the resource and connecting them to external organizations and resources out there for them to pursue developing geothermal projects. I just got back from the ACES National Conference. So that's American Indian American Indian Science and Engineering Society. And Geothermal Rising participated in their career day. And that was fantastic. So it was the first career day that I've done, and we met with so many students that were interested in learning about careers in geothermal. And we met with so many educators that worked at tribal colleges and universities that have an interest in including geothermal in their curriculum. In addition to all of that, I also serve as a resource for industry members that are part of our Geothermal Rising membership and helping them navigate tribal community engagement. It's extremely important for everyone to prioritize building relationships with tribes, even if you're just developing a project near a reservation or tribally sensitive lands. It's important to engage with tribes early and often throughout the project, and it'll help everything run smoother.
Is
So
there
I'm
a
here to,
for a distance for your
is there,
geothermal?
so, so there isn't like a firm recommendation, but 35 miles is kind of like a loose recommendation. So I'm here to help organizations establish and maintain, navigate relationships with tribes.
That is so cool. So recently, Geothermal Rising expanded into Canada. Do you find yourself now engaged more with the Canadian geothermal initiatives or the Indigenous communities there?
So I am doing more in Canada. Not as much as the US. There are some significant differences in First Nations land structure and like legal structure that I don't understand, but a lot of basic community engagement issues are the same across most Indigenous populations. And a lot of drivers behind Indigenous groups developing geothermal projects is the same. Whereas we focus a lot, the geothermal industry as a whole focuses a lot on the economic drivers of geothermal. Tribes and First Nations, that driver is focused more on improving community quality of life. So even though the economics are always going to have to make sense, the driving force behind the why is typically more community centric.
What are some of the significant barriers or opportunities you see for tribal communities in developing geothermal resources?
Yeah, so since most of the tribes are in the western half of the United States, there's a tremendous geothermal resource, as we all know. And one of the biggest barriers is understanding the land structure for tribal communities. There are some tribal communities that, due to the Dawes Act, where lands were allotted to tribal members at the time, and the remaining land on the reservation was sold to non-natives. That created, in some locations, a checkerboard. So you have states like the state of Colorado that considers the geothermal resource as a surface right, and the BIA classifies geothermal resource as a mineral right. So you have these locations where it's a chunk of tribal land and then a chunk of non-tribal land. So then it's like mineral ownership, surface ownership, mineral ownership, surface ownership, and that complicates leasing. But there is a tremendous amount of opportunities still. There's hiccups to navigate like that, which is quite significant. But there's a tremendous amount of tribes that have geothermal resources that are interested in developing them.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. So, how do you see the role of education and outreach evolving with the tribes as geothermal gains more attention in North America?
I really think that it comes down to combating misinformation. even with like the general population, there is a lot of confusion about like fracking and what fracking actually is. It's just kind of been just this negative term without people actually like understanding like what's actually happening in that process. So I feel like typically something like that, like when someone takes the time to explain the whole process to someone that goes a long way in understanding and education, and also going into the communities more and working with schools to help educate like at the elementary, middle school, high school levels on geothermal resources, geothermal capabilities, and geothermal careers. All of that is going to play a larger role in advancing geothermal with tribes.
So one thing you had mentioned to me previously is that each tribe has an energy manager.
Yes,
So
often. Go
yeah.
ahead.
So are you engaged with all of these energy managers at different tribes across the US?
So I am engaged with several.
Okay.
So it really just kind of depends on where that specific tribe is looking at developing. There are many that are just very, very much into we want to do solar, and that's what's gonna like we think that's what's gonna work best for our community. So that's the lane that we feel comfortable in. Especially there is some concern of geothermal being an extractive energy, which it, it isn't exactly, it doesn't exactly fall into the extractive category of energy production because I think that it works in such a like symbiotic relationship with the earth in order for the system to continue to operate. So I don't think that it quite fits into that category. And that's just additional work that kind of has to be done in the space, is explaining the technology better.
I think it's really interesting, number one, that solar is the chosen dominant energy source on tribal lands. You would think that that's not very,
Yeah.
it's an eyesore, right? And geothermal is the hidden energy power.
Yes.
So you would
Yes.
think that it would be well received by tribal
Uh,
communities.
yeah. So one of the biggest hurdles for developing geothermal is the length of time that it takes to get a project initiated to putting electrons on the grid. So with solar, it is something that you can decide you're going to do solar. And especially under the last administration, where there was a tremendous amount of funding available in that bucket, you can deploy solar like very quickly, and you don't have to worry about tribal administrations changing. And it just comes down to how quickly it can be deployed.
Yeah, that makes sense. Um, well, that's interesting that tribes have got energy managers, and then I assume they want their own like microgrid for each tribal community. Do
Yep, some do, some do, some don't.
okay.
Yeah, so there are some tribal nations that I've talked to that kind of want to be like completely islanded in their energy, and some that just want to be developers. Like they just want to produce energy and sell it onto the grid for economic development purposes. So there's a wide range of what the overall goal is. There's a big, like, common phrase in Indian country where it's if you've met one tribe, you've met one tribe. There are 574 tribes, and all of them are different and have different goals and different cultural priorities. So all of that has to be taken into account when working with tribes and ascertaining what their goals are.
So, do the tribes want to be geothermal developers themselves, or do they want to go partner with a geothermal startup and develop the land? What are
Um, yeah, so there's a varying degree. Some groups that I've talked to are very much interested in partnering, and then some would prefer to be the sole owner and operator. So it very much it varies. It varies widely. Like I said, there's so many tribes out there, and each one, like tribes are sovereign nations, and they each have their own government that is in charge of making these decisions.
And do you go to the field? Do you go visit tribes on their land?
Um, some I've gone to visit some tribes on their land. However, I don't have a super strong budget to be able to go to as many locations as I would like to. So I rely a lot on Zoom.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Are there any projects or partnerships you're especially excited about right now?
So there are several projects within Indian country and Canadian First Nations that are pretty exciting right now. So the Pilgrim Hot Springs, they're located 62 miles north of Nome, Alaska, and they're working to build a small binary power plant. And it's only like 75 kilowatts of energy, which is substantial for their needs at their location. They're quite remote, and they're pretty far along in developing that. And of course, the Fort Nelson First Nations Tutica project. That venture where they're utilizing or yeah, the Fort Nelson First Nations geothermal venture, Tutica, where they're repurposing a depleted gas field for a large-scale geothermal operation. Those are really exciting projects out there that Indigenous groups are working on. And as far as GR goes, we are partnering with the Alliance for Tribal Clean Energy, and with them, we're offering a class called Pathways to Trust. We've had one previously, December last year, but we're offering a workshop following GRC. And that workshop focuses on building relationships with tribes, navigating the basics of understanding like tribal histories and how to approach tribes. And part of that too is getting companies on a kind of so they sorry. The Alliance for Tribal Clean Energy has a preferred partners list. So this list is a list of companies that have been vetted by them through a combination of looking at their past relationships working with tribes and partway through like taking their Pathways to Trust cultural training program. And this is to help tribes find organizations to work with. So that's the biggest benefit of this workshop, and the biggest benefit to tribes is helping tribes find companies that they feel like they can trust. Throughout history, there have been reasons for tribes to develop mistrust with like the government and industry, not just geothermal industry, but industry on the whole. So we're working for ways to combat that and really help tribes that want to develop geothermal be able to connect with companies that, first of all, want to work with tribes and companies that they can trust.
What advice would you give to young professionals or students, especially from underrepresented communities who are interested in entering the geothermal sector?
Yeah, so as far as from underrepresented communities, I think that it is like you have a unique background that not a lot of other people have. And if you are interested in something like geothermal, and you're going through and you're studying, you're completing your degrees, and you don't even have to do a degree path exactly, but you bring a unique set of skills that not everyone has, especially in navigating relationships. So one thing that I read that I thought was cool was organizations need someone to be able to like read the rock and read the room. So there's just a wide skill set that's needed. So always just remain curious and pursue your dreams. Like geothermal absolutely is where I want to be, and I definitely like worked hard to get here, and I love it. Yeah.
Thank you, Jessica, for joining me today. And thank you to our listeners for joining us on this episode of Geothermal Unleashed. I hope today's discussion has sparked new insights and deepened your understanding of the geothermal industry's incredible potential. Until next time, keep pushing the boundaries of what's possible, and let's continue working together to unleash the full potential of geothermal. Thank you.
Thank you.